Hello, welcome to Chimney Sweep University Training Series. Today's short mini lesson will focus on the OSHA requirements for documenting workplace injuries. Is your company fully required to document workplace injuries, or are you on a partially exempt list for different reasons? If this is a free version, then interactive questions, images, quizzing, and answers will be turned off. If this is a paid version for continuing education units or certification requirements, then you will be in a full interactive version. For information of where to sign up for the premium version, go to chimneysweeps.com and find the section regarding training. Good luck, and enjoy your presentation.
All right, so let's get our hands dirty with this deep dive.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about soot.
Right,
We're
yeah.
talking OSHA record keeping.
Yeah.
Specifically for you, our Chimney Sweep listeners, you sent us a bunch of info on this, and honestly, it's a bit of a maze.
Yeah, it can be.
But don't worry, we'll climb through it together.
That's right. We'll figure it out.
So
What I think is so fascinating about this is how these regulations, designed for workplace safety can sometimes feel like a tight squeeze, especially for smaller businesses.
yeah, exactly. So you're up on those roofs dealing with fireplaces and chimneys all day. But did you know there's this whole world of paperwork too? We're talking OSHA 1904.
Yeah.
The rule book for recording work-related injuries and illnesses.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about 1904 is that it lays out these very specific criteria for what needs to be recorded.
Okay.
It's not just about major accidents. We're talking anything from a chimney sweep twisting an ankle, getting out of their truck, to, well, something much more serious.
So even a seemingly minor incident could trigger these record-keeping requirements.
It could.
That's kind of a surprise.
It is. The focus is on whether the injury or illness, happened in a work-related context, not necessarily on how severe it is.
Okay, so that's something to keep in mind.
Right.
Now, you also sent us information about exemptions, right?
Right.
Some businesses with less than 10 employees don't have to keep these records. Could that apply to chimney sweeps?
That is the million-dollar question. And to answer it, we need to take a look at something called NAICS, the North American Industry Classification System.
Okay.
Think of it like a giant filing cabinet where every type of business has its own little drawer.
Okay, so where did chimney sweeps fit in this filing cabinet?
Well, there's a code for chimney sweep. It's 561790, and unfortunately, it's not exempt from the record-keeping rules. But here's where it gets interesting. Building Inspection Code 511350 is exempt.
Okay.
And so is Appliance Repair and Maintenance Code 811412.
Hold on, I see where you're going with this.
Okay.
You also highlighted a section in NFPA 211, which is a standard for chimneys and fireplaces that defines fireplaces as appliances.
Yes.
So could a chimney sweep potentially classify their business under appliance repair to claim that exemption?
Now you're thinking like a true deep diver.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating possibility, and it really highlights the importance of understanding these codes. But of course, this is where legal advice comes in.
Right. Definitely don't make any rash decisions based on our chat here.
Please don't.
But it's a great example of how digging a little deeper can reveal some surprising options.
It really can.
Okay, so let's go back to those recordable injuries for a moment. We mentioned that OSHA has specific criteria. What are those exactly?
Well, one of the key factors is whether the injury requires medical treatment beyond first aid.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm.
But where does OSHA draw the line between slapping on a Band-Aid and needing actual medical attention?
That's where things get really interesting. OSHA actually has very clear definitions for first aid and medical treatment. So, for example, cleaning a wound with antiseptic wipes, that's first aid. Getting stitches or a tetanus shot, that's medical treatment, and it needs to be recorded.
So even something that seems relatively minor, like needing a few stitches, could trigger the record-keeping requirement.
Exactly. And here's another detail that might surprise you. Let's say you get a cut on the job and the doctor recommends stitches, but you decide to tough it out and refuse treatment.
Wait, so even if the employee doesn't actually receive the treatment, the case is still recordable?
That's right. It's about the nature of the injury itself, not just the treatment provided.
Wow. Okay. That's definitely good to know. So we've got medical treatment as one trigger. What about situations where an employee needs time off work or maybe can't do their regular duties because of an injury?
Yeah, that's another important area. OSHA looks at things like days away from work, restricted work, and job transfer as potential indicators of a recordable injury.
So if a chimney sweep hurts their back and needs a few days to recover, that would definitely need to be recorded.
Absolutely. And it's important to be accurate with the day count.
Okay,
The day of the injury itself doesn't count as a day away.
gotcha.
And if an employee ends up needing more time off than initially anticipated, You need to update those records accordingly.
So it sounds like there's a lot of ongoing responsibility to keep those records up to date and accurate.
There is. And here's another point that often trips people up. Let's say you have an employee who needs to avoid heavy lifting, so you assign them to lighter duties before they get injured. That kind of pre-existing work restriction wouldn't be recordable.
Oh.
It only applies if the restriction is a direct result of a work-related injury or illness.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's
You wouldn't want those pre-existing accommodations to skew the injury data.
Exactly. Now let's move on to something that can get a little tricky: recurring injuries.
Okay?
How does OSHA handle those in terms of record keeping?
Yeah, it seems like it could be a bit of a gray area.
It can be OSHA. 1904 has specific scenarios outlined to help employers determine whether a recurring injury is a new case, a recurrence of a previous injury, or a continuation of an existing one.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
It's not.
Do you have an example that might illustrate this complexity?
Certainly, Scenario 6 in the OSHA handbook is a great example. It talks about an employee who has a knee injury that requires surgery. They return to work and then later injure the same knee again, leading to another surgery.
Ouch, that sounds rough.
It is, but here's where it gets interesting. A few months later, the employee bumps their knee at work. Now, you might think, okay, another knee issue, this definitely needs to be recorded. But in this scenario, the doctor determined that the original injury requiring surgery had fully resolved and that the bumped knee incident involved a different tendon and was a separate issue.
So even though it's the same knee, it's treated as a separate incident because the original injury was considered resolved?
Exactly. And because the employee was already taking medication for the second surgery, the bumped knee incident wasn't considered a new recordable event.
Wow, that's a lot of nuance. It sounds like dealing with recurring injuries requires careful analysis of the medical details and how each event relates to the others.
It absolutely does, and that's why thorough documentation is crucial.
Right. You need to have all the information at your fingertips to make those judgments.
Yeah.
So we've talked about what needs to be recorded, but what about the actual process? What forms or documents do chimney sweeps need to be familiar with?
Well, OSHA has made things a bit easier by streamlining the process down to 3 main forms. The OSHA Form 300, which is the log of work-related injuries and illnesses, the OSHA Form 300A, which summarizes those entries at the end of the year, and the OSHA Form 301, which provides a more detailed incident report for each individual case.
Okay, so the 300 is like your ongoing log.
Yeah.
The 300A is the year-end summary, and the 301 gives you the specifics of each incident.
That's a great way to put it. Now, another question that often comes up is, what about temporary or leased employees? How does record keeping work in those situations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. If you're bringing in someone for a short-term project who's responsible for those records,
It can get a bit tricky because the responsibility often depends on the specific agreement between the employer and the staffing agency.
okay.
In some cases, the employer might be responsible for recording injuries and illnesses on their own OSHA 300 log, even if the employee is technically employed by the staffing agency.
So even though the worker isn't technically your employee, you might still be responsible for their records.
Exactly. In other cases, the staffing agency might handle the initial record keeping and then provide the necessary information to the employer for their overall records.
So clear communication and a well-defined agreement are key here. You need to know who's doing what to ensure those records are accurate and complete.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about reporting requirements.
Okay.
Are there situations where a chimney sweep would need to report an incident directly to OSHA rather than just recording it internally?
Yeah, that's an important distinction. What kind of situations trigger that immediate reporting requirement?
The most serious situations, of course. Any workplace fatality must be reported to OSHA within 8 hours. The same time frame applies if 3 or more employees are hospitalized as a result of a work-related incident.
So those are considered major incidents that require prompt notification.
They are, and it's not just about informing OSHA. Reporting those incidents triggers a potential investigation to determine the cause and identify any necessary corrective actions.
So it plays a vital role in prevention and improving workplace safety overall. Now, I know OSHA regulations are pretty comprehensive, but are there any ways for businesses to request a variance from certain requirements? Like if they feel they have an alternative method that's equally or even more safe?
Yes, OSHA does have a process for variances, but it's important to understand that they're not granted easily. An employer would need to demonstrate that their proposed alternative methods provide equal or greater protection for employees compared to the standard OSHA requirements.
So it's not a way to simply opt out of regulations because they're inconvenient?
Correct. It's about finding innovative solutions that maintain or enhance worker safety. The employer would need to submit a detailed petition outlining their alternative methods and providing evidence to support their claim of equal or greater protection.
It sounds like a rigorous process, but it does offer some flexibility in certain situations.
It does.
Now let's bring this back to our chimney sweep listeners. What are some common hazards they might encounter on the job that could lead to recordable injuries?
Would chimney sweeps work in unique and potentially hazardous environments? They often deal with heights-confined spaces and exposure to soot and other potentially harmful substances. Slips, trips, and falls are common hazards, especially when working on rooftops or ladders.
Its physically demanding work and fatigue could certainly play a role in accidents.
That's right. And let's not forget about the potential for burns. Chimney sweeps work with hot surfaces and sometimes need to deal with chimney fires, which can create extremely dangerous conditions.
So it's not just about the physical hazards, there's also the element of fire risk.
Precisely. Chimney sweeps need to be highly trained and equipped to handle these various hazards safely.
And that brings us back to the importance of OSHA record keeping. By diligently documenting injuries and illnesses, chimney sweeps can gain valuable insights into the specific hazards they face and identify areas where safety practices can be improved.
Absolutely. Record keeping becomes a tool for analysis prevention and ultimately creating a safer work environment.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into OSHA record keeping for chimney sweeps.
Yeah, it's like having a safety journal, really. You're tracking those bumps and bruises, not just because OSHA says so, but because it helps you see patterns and potential danger zones.
Right. It's about turning those records into actionable insights. So are there any resources or best practices out there to help chimney sweeps stay on top of all these requirements?
Absolutely. OSHA has a ton of resources on their website, including fact sheets, FAQs, and even e-learning courses.
Okay, so there's definitely help available if you're feeling a little lost in the OSHA jungle.
There is. And something that's often overlooked is the role of industry associations. Groups like the National Chimney Sweep Guild and the Chimney Safety Institute of America are great resources for staying up to date on best practices and industry-specific guidance.
Right, those groups can offer that extra layer of support and insight that's tailored to the unique challenges chimney sweeps face.
Exactly. Now let's talk about something that can be a real headache for business owners, record-keeping mistakes.
Okay.
What are some common pitfalls chimney sweeps, or any business for that matter, should watch out for?
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of room for error, especially when you're dealing with all these different forms and deadlines.
There is. One of the most common mistakes is simply failing to record an injury or illness that meets the OSHA criteria. Maybe it seems minor, or maybe there's a misunderstanding about what needs to be recorded, but those omissions can come back to bite you.
Right. It's better to err on the side of caution and document everything that could potentially be a recordable incident.
Exactly. Another common mistake is inaccurately describing the injury or illness on the forms. Using vague language or failing to capture the specific details can create problems down the road.
So it's not enough to just check a box. You need to provide a clear and accurate description of what happened.
Right. And something else to watch out for is failing to properly classify the case. OSHA has specific guidelines for classifying injuries and illnesses based on the nature of the event and the outcome.
So there's a bit of detective work involved in figuring out which category an incident falls into.
There is. And of course, another common mistake is missing deadlines. OSHA has specific timeframes for recording incidents and submitting forms.
So staying organized and having a system in place for tracking those deadlines is crucial.
Absolutely. Now, sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, mistakes happen. What if a chimney sweep realizes they've made an error in their OSHA records? What should they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is it better to just ignore it and hope no one notices, or is there a proper procedure for correcting those mistakes?
Definitely don't ignore it. Transparency is key here. If you discover an error, the best course of action is to correct it promptly and document the correction. OSHA actually provides guidance on how to make those corrections on the forms.
So they've built in a mechanism for fixing those inevitable human errors.
They have. And it's important to remember that OSHA isn't out to punish businesses for making honest mistakes. Their focus is on ensuring worker safety.
Right. They want to see that you're making a good faith effort to comply with the regulations and maintain a safe working environment.
Exactly. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that often goes hand in hand with OSHA workers' compensation.
Okay.
How does that system intersect with OSHA record keeping?
Yeah, that's a good one. Are workers' comp claims always considered recordable incidents?
Not necessarily. A workers' compensation claim can be a trigger for OSHA record keeping, but it's not automatic.
So there are situations where a worker might file a workers' comp claim, but the incident wouldn't meet the OSHA criteria for recording.
Exactly. For example, let's say a chimney sweep experiences a flare-up of an old back injury while on the job. They might file a workers' comp claim, but if it's not considered a new injury, it wouldn't necessarily be a recordable incident under OSHA.
So there's a distinction between what's covered under workers' comp and what needs to be recorded for OSHA purposes.
There is. And, sometimes employers worry that diligently recording injuries will lead to higher workers' compensation costs.
Yeah, it seems like that could be a concern.
It's understandable. But remember, OSHA record keeping isn't about punishing businesses or inflating insurance premiums. It's about creating a safer work environment.
Right. It's about identifying hazards, analyzing trends, and implementing preventative measures.
And ultimately, a safer workplace benefits everyone. It reduces injuries, lowers cost, and creates a more positive and productive work environment.
So it's a win-win for both employers and employees.
It is. Now let's touch on something that's becoming increasingly important in today's business landscape: the use of technology in OSHA record keeping.
Yeah, it seems like there are a lot of software solutions popping up to help businesses manage these requirements digitally.
There are, and for good reason. Using technology can streamline the process, improve accuracy, and make it easier to analyze data and identify trends.
So instead of juggling paper forms and spreadsheets, you can have everything at your fingertips in a digital platform.
Exactly. And, one of the biggest benefits of using software is that it can help ensure compliance with OSHA regulations.
Yeah.
Many of these programs have built-in features that guide you through the process, flag potential errors, and even generate reports automatically.
So it takes some of the guesswork out of it and reduces the risk of making costly mistakes.
It does. And, another advantage of using technology is that it makes it easier to share information with employees. You can give them access to safety training materials, incident reports, and other relevant documents.
Right. It creates a more transparent and collaborative approach to safety.
It does. And something else that's really interesting is the potential for using technology to go beyond basic record keeping and really delve into proactive safety management.
So it's not just about documenting what's already happened, but using that data to prevent future incidents.
Exactly. Some of these software solutions have advanced features that allow you to track near misses, identify potential hazards, and even create customized safety checklists for specific tasks.
So you're moving from reactive to proactive,
Yeah.
which is a huge shift in the safety mindset.
It is, and it's a shift that's made possible by technology.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive. We've talked about resources, common mistakes, workers' compensation, and the role of technology. Yeah, it's about taking those extra steps, investing in the right training and equipment, and always putting safety first, even when deadlines are looming and chimneys are calling.
Yeah, it's about, recognizing that every chimney sweep deserves to come home safe and sound at the end of the day.
Right, and that's where our deep dive comes full circle. We started by talking about the nuts and bolts of OSHA record keeping, those forms and deadlines and regulations. But what we're really talking about is something much bigger.
Yeah, we're talking about protecting lives and livelihoods.
We're talking about building a culture where safety isn't just a box to check, but a value that's woven into the very fabric of the chimney sweep profession.
Absolutely. It's about, recognizing that every climb, every inspection, every sweep is a chance to not only do your job well, but to do it safely.
Right, and that's the message we want you to take with you as you head back up those chimneys. Remember, knowledge is power, and understanding these regulations can make a real difference in your business and in your life.
Yeah, we covered a lot today, from NAICS codes and exemptions to the nuances of recurring injuries. We talked about the importance of accurate documentation, the role of technology, and the connection between OSHA and workers' compensation.
But the most important takeaway is the safety isn't just a set of rules, it's a commitment.
It is a commitment to yourself, to your employees, and to the integrity of your craft.
So keep those chimneys clean. Stay safe out there. And remember, we're here to support you on your journey to a safer and more successful business.